European bison have been released into countryside near Canterbury, Kent, to help restore the area to its natural state. The project, led by Kent Wildlife Trust and the Wildwood Trust, is taking place in West Blean and Thorndon Woods. They will fell trees by rubbing against them, creating space and light and providing deadwood to help other plants and animals. The area has been prepared by the UK's first ever bison rangers. The Trust said the next step is to introduce Exmoor ponies, Iron Age pigs and Longhorn cattle, whose natural behaviours complement the bison. Paul Whitfield, the Director General of Wildwood Trust, said, "It's going to demonstrate the very real impact nature-based solutions can have in solving the climate crisis. We're going to prove the impact bison in the wild can have on the environment. They will create an explosion of biodiversity and build habitat resilience, locking in carbon to help reduce global temperature rise." The European bison, which can weigh up to a ton, were extinct in the wild at the end of World War II. They are still endangered, and have been bred from zoo herds maintained in Eastern Europe.
You see his face clearly, right there.
A video showing a mysterious pale figure near a home in the United States is gaining traction on social media. The video has been caught on a CCTV installed in the area and posted on Twitter by Paranormality magazine. The accompanying tweet text says that the video was shot near Moorhead, in Kentucky. The video has sparked a debate among paranormal enthusiasts around the world as to what it could be. The image resembles the human-like figures that caused a lot of destruction in the movie Spectral. The 33-second video shows a pale, human-like figure. It appears lanky and hunched over near the back garden of a home. It is seen carefully moving ahead and looking around while approaching the homeowner's car. In the audio of the clip, a person is heard saying, "You can see his face clearly." The clip, shared with the caption, "Here's the video of the pale creature caught on a security cam near Moorhead, KY, on July 9, has amassed 500,000 views. Several Twitter users are intrigued by the video and have discussed what the figure could be. "The question I have is this infrared? Because the pale creature would actually be dark-colored, dude in a black suit, and showing up white in that case. I know it's not your vid, but things like that can reveal a lot of missed detail." A user commented, "If this was taken with a security cam, why is the camera moving like someone is holding it? Security cams are fixed and don't float around," said another. One of the local firms that claim to be working in the field of paranormal research replied, "To answer why the camera is moving, you can see the reflection of the person recording this footage from their phone in the glass of the monitor. As to what it is, a recording or a recording degrade the quality of the original footage. No way to know what we're seeing." In the 2016 movie Spectral, the filmmakers had shown a moving Einstein-Bose condensate swirling around, killing people by freezing them from the inside and defying any attempts to destroy them with conventional weapons. The movie too has led to a lot of buzz on the internet about the behavior of the condensate. Meghan Markle has been accused of being part of a Hollywood self-serving elite, with a commentator suggesting the Duchess is failing at selfless service. Writing on Twitter, foreign policy expert James J. Carafano tweeted, "British royalty is about selfless service. Meghan is, let's be honest, part of a Hollywood self-serving elite. What did people really expect? Mr. Carafano's tweet came in response to a remark from royal commentator Niall Gardiner, who said, "Meghan Markle is no Princess Diana." This came after Tom Bower's new book, Revenge: Meghan, Harry and the War Between the Windsors, published on Sunday, claimed that Meghan wanted to be a Hollywood version of Prince Harry's late mother. According to the New York Post, he claimed that Meghan's fixation on Princess Diana started after the couple visited Australia in 2018 as part of a royal tour, where they were greeted with a huge reception from fans. Meghan has repeatedly been compared with Diana in the past, especially in the wake of the Sussexes' interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2020. Portuguese historian Lourenço Pereira Coutinho accused the Duchess of playing the role of 21st-century Princess Diana on camera. He said, "A few days ago, Meghan Markle gave an interview to Oprah Winfrey, the Queen of North American talk shows, who served first of all to complain about her husband's family. The scene had all the ingredients to move public opinion. The interviewee is a commoner African American woman that presented herself as the victim of an insensitive and dysfunctional family, who personifies an institution considered anachronistic." With an air of sympathy and the support of her husband, actress Meghan Markle played the role of 21st-century Princess Diana on camera. There is no better way to empathize with viewers than to suggest suffering similarities with an icon of global dimension. Meanwhile, body language expert Judy James described Meghan as being almost a "perfect copy" of Princess Diana. Speaking about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's 2021 Christmas card, Ms. James said, "The body language that Meghan uses with her baby here is an almost direct and perfect copy of a pose adopted by Diana with her own baby many years before. Both women define themselves as loving, doting mothers with this pose, and both allow their babies to be seen in a playful mood as they laugh and smile down at them." The expert added, "Both Meghan and Diana are seen in profile, leaning back to look up at their children as they raise them higher than their own heads." But Ms. James pointed out one key difference between the two royals. She explained, "But, although Meghan's head leans back onto the chest of the royal prince she so clearly loves and is loved by, Diana's head is sadly supported by a cushion alone." Sales were $15.5 billion, reflecting highest growth in over a decade. Cash flow forecast lowered on impact of exchange rates. Russia International Business Machines Corp. reported sales that topped analysts' estimates, signaling that demand for mainframe computers, consulting and cloud services remains strong amid concerns of a pullback in tech spending. Sales rose 9% to $15.5 billion in the second quarter, the company said Monday in a statement. Analysts were expecting an average of $15.2 billion according to data compiled by Bloomberg. The company lowered its full-year free cash flow estimate to $10 billion from an earlier range of $10 billion to $10.5 billion. The reduced cash flow forecast is due to the strength of the dollar and the loss of IBM's highly profitable Russia business, rather than a broader business slowdown. Chief Financial Officer Jim Kavanaugh said in an interview, "Our demand remains solid," he said. The shares closed down 1.3% at $138.13 in New York and were little changed in extended trading. IBM has been a rare pocket of stability in the tech market meltdown, gaining 3.3% this year compared with a 31% loss for the iShares Expanded Tech Sector ETF. Chief Executive Officer Arvind Krishna's goal has been to pivot Big Blue from its traditional business of infrastructure and information technology services to the fast-growing cloud computing market. Acquisitions have been a major part of the strategy, with IBM buying more than 25 companies under Krishna's tenure, largely focused on bolstering the company's hybrid cloud offerings. Hybrid cloud revenue jumped 18% to $5.9 billion in the quarter. Software unit revenue increased 6.4% to $6.2 billion, missing estimates. Consulting sales gained 10% to $4.8 billion, beating estimates. We continue to expect full-year revenue growth at the high end of our mid-single-digit model, Krishna said Monday in the statement. Red Hat sales increased 12%, the slowest rate since it was acquired in 2019. The division has been a key part of Krishna's turnaround strategy, and typically posts growth closer to 20%. Last week, IBM named Matt Hicks as the new head of the segment, promising little change in strategy. The growth dip is due to currency and there's no material slowdown in the unit, which grew 17% at constant currency, Kavanaugh said. Owing to the release of a new mainframe, the fastest-growing segment in the second quarter was infrastructure, which jumped 19% to $4.2 billion. Despite pivoting away from on-premise offerings, the company remains one of the biggest makers of mainframe computers, which have long served as a foundation of a business's most important applications. In November, IBM spun off a large portion of its legacy infrastructure services unit into a new company called Kyndryl Holdings Inc. Sales to Kyndryl continue to make up a significant portion of IBM's revenue. Tech peers that have significant overseas exposure including Oracle Corp., Salesforce Inc., and Microsoft Corp., have seen growth curtailed by a surging U.S. dollar. IBM, with about half of its sales outside the Americas, said current exchange rates will weigh on the full-year forecast by 6 percentage points, up from a 3 to 4 point estimate in April. Currency weighed on second-quarter growth by 7 percentage points, the company said. Earnings excluding some costs were $2.31 a share, 2 cents higher than the average analyst estimate. Gross margin was 53.4%, beating the 52.9% analysts expected. Free cash flow was $3.3 billion, beating estimates for $2.46 billion. The Met Office says we could see Britain's hottest recorded temperature within hours, an extraordinary milestone. So why are we seeing such brutal temperatures? Most climate scientists say the answer is climate change. The Met Office estimates that the extreme heat we will be seeing over the next couple of days has been made 10 times more likely because of it. We are being warned it could pose a life-threatening risk to even normally healthy people, and just look at the impact it is having in our hospitals, schools and transport systems. Now remember, this is happening when average world temperatures have only risen just over 1°C beyond levels seen before many parts of the world became industrialized. 1 degree doesn't sound much, does it? But we're living in the hottest period for 125,000 years, according to the UN's climate science body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. We know what's behind this. The greenhouse gas emissions caused by our burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas, which trap heat in our atmosphere. They have helped push the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to the highest levels seen for 2 million years, according to the IPCC. So where is our climate headed? The target set by the UN is to limit global temperature increases to 1.5 C higher than pre-industrial levels. It says that should avoid the most dangerous impacts of climate change. To do that, emissions need to have peaked by 2025, in only 2.5 years. CO2 emissions from energy increased by 6% in 2021 to 36.3 billion tons, the highest ever level. The International Energy Agency estimates they need to virtually have by 2030. We need a minimum 43% reduction by the end of this decade, according to the IPCC. Then the world needs to scale back emissions to net zero by 2050. That means cutting greenhouse gases as much as possible and finding ways to draw CO2 out of the atmosphere to make up for any that remain. It is a huge challenge. Many people believe the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. Remember that big UN conference in Glasgow last year? If all the promises governments made there were actually implemented, then we'd be looking at temperatures rising by something like 2.4 C from pre-industrial levels by the end of the century. But the truth is, even if we do succeed in reducing emissions to that really ambitious 1.5 C target, UK summers will continue to get hotter. In a few decades this might actually be quite a cool summer, says Professor Frederica Otto, a climate scientist at Imperial College London. We should expect more and longer heatwaves in the future, says Professor Nigel Arnall, a climate scientist at Reading University. We will be seeing more heat health alerts, more heat stress days, days when it is too hot to work, and damaging heat extremes to increase, he warns. So what is the UK doing about it? Nowhere near enough, is the stark conclusion of the Climate Change Committee, CCC, the government's advisors on climate change. Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned the world was at 1 minute to midnight on climate change in his speech opening the Glasgow Climate Conference. But in a report on the UK's progress towards net zero, the CCC warned that his government's current policies are very unlikely to do the job. It said the government has set a lot of targets and put a lot of policies in place, but warns there is scant evidence these goals will be delivered. And the country is not doing enough to prepare itself for the more frequent and intense heatwaves climate change will bring. Heatwaves caused an additional 2,000 deaths in 2020. According to the UK Health Security Agency, that figure is likely to triple in coming decades without government action, according to Baroness Brown, Deputy Chair of the Climate Change Committee. We've been telling the government for over 10 years that we are nothing like well enough prepared in the UK for the really hot weather we are seeing now. She says, particularly the extreme heat many people experience in their homes. It is a disgrace, people are dying of heat, or for that matter cold, in the UK. Says Professor Hannah Cloke of the University of Reading. Most UK buildings and infrastructure were not designed to cope with the kind of temperatures we are seeing this week, and much more needs to be done to adapt them, she says. We have made great strides in forecasting extreme weather and climate conditions in recent years. Now we need the systems in place so that people and governments act on the warnings we can provide, whether 3 hours, 3 days, or 3 decades in advance. The UK could have its hottest day on record this week, with temperatures forecast to hit up to 41 C, 106 F. A high of 38.1 C was recorded in Santon Downham, Suffolk, making Monday the hottest day of the year so far, while 37 C was exceeded in several places. The Met Office has issued a red extreme heat warning for Monday and Tuesday in much of England, from London and the southeast up to York and Manchester. The current highest temperature in the UK is 38.7 C in Cambridge in July 2019. A high of 38.5 C was reached in Faversham, Kent, in August 2003, making Monday the third hottest day on record. Hawarden in Flintshire hit 37.1 C, meaning the hottest day on record for Wales according to provisional figures from the Met Office. Scotland and Northern Ireland also experienced their warmest days of the year so far, with 31.3 C recorded in Aboyne, Aberdeenshire, and 31.1 C in Darilyn, County Fermanagh. Temperatures above 37 C were also recorded in London, Cambridge, Surrey and elsewhere in Suffolk. Amber warnings are in place across England and Wales, and parts of Scotland. Peak temperatures are expected on Tuesday afternoon, with Worksop, Nottinghamshire, forecast to see 41 C by the Met Office. It is the first time the Met Office has issued a red warning since the system was introduced last year. It means widespread impacts on people and infrastructure are expected, with substantial changes in working practices and daily routines required. Overnight temperatures could be in the mid-20s, before cooling on Wednesday. Some schools closed early, or chose not to open at all, although the government has issued guidance designed to keep them open. One teaching union said most chose to stay open. Network Rail said people should travel only if absolutely necessary on Monday and Tuesday, with some cancellations and speed restrictions in place across the network. LNER will not run services between London and Leeds and York for much of Tuesday. Road congestion dropped by up to 10% in London, Birmingham, Bristol and Glasgow on Monday morning. Compared with the same time last week, data from satellite navigation firm TomTom showed. The Ministry of Defence said aircraft were using alternative airfields after reports of the tarmac melting on the runway at RAF Brize Norton in Oxfordshire. Flights were suspended at Luton Airport after a section of the runway lifted due to the hot weather, the airport said. EasyJet said several flights had been diverted to nearby airports, while some others were cancelled as a result. Responding to claims the UK has seen worse heat, such as during the prolonged heatwave in 1976, BBC Weather's Simon King said that dangerously high, expected temperatures were up to 10 C above the extended heatwave and severe drought experienced then. Alongside the Met Office's red and amber warnings, the UK Health Security Agency has issued a Level 4 warning for England, which the government is treating as a national emergency. The extreme heat has also put pressure on the NHS, but Health Secretary Steve Barclay said the government was closely monitoring the situation, with additional resources in place, although he said the highest point of concern was on Tuesday afternoon. Cabinet Office Minister Kit Malthouse rejected criticism of Boris Johnson for not attending Cobra meetings on the heatwave, saying he had briefed the Prime Minister and it was his job to coordinate the response across the government. Soaring temperatures are also having a devastating impact on much of Europe and North Africa, with authorities in western France warning of a heat apocalypse in 15 regions. Wildfires have been raging from Greece to Morocco, with thousands being evacuated from, and more than 1,000 deaths have been attributed to the heat in Portugal and Spain in recent days. During a speech in Cornwall, the Prince of Wales said that the commitments around net zero had never been more vital as we all swelter under today's alarming record temperatures across Britain and Europe. He added that the climate crisis was a genuine emergency, and that tackling it was utterly essential. The heatwave is happening when average world temperatures have risen by just over 1 C from their pre-industrial levels. We are living in the hottest period for 125,000 years. According to the UN's climate science body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. We know what is behind this. greenhouse gas emissions caused by our burning of fossil fuels like coal and gas. Concentrations of carbon dioxide, Colorado 2, in the atmosphere are at the highest level for 2 million years and rising, according to the IPCC. If all the promises governments made at the UN COP26 climate conference in Glasgow last year are actually implemented, then we're looking at temperatures rising by 2.4 C by the end of the century. But the bad news is that emissions of CO2 continue to increase. Without big cuts by 2030, we could see temperatures go even higher. Perhaps as much as 4 C by the end of the century, scientists predict. What does that mean? I think you know the answer to that. It means more frequent and intense heatwaves like this. People have been warned to take care if they cool off in water. With several deaths reported over the weekend, including a 16-year-old boy swimming in Salford Keys on Saturday evening and a 13-year-old boy who went missing in the River Tyne in Northumberland on Sunday. On Monday, a 16-year-old boy died after getting into difficulty in Maidenhead, Berkshire, Thames Valley Police said. Water companies in southern and eastern England have warned increased demand is leading to low pressure, and even interrupted supply, for some households. Experts have urged people to drink water, keep their curtains closed where possible, and to check on friends and relatives. Some attractions and businesses have closed or adapted their opening hours due to the heat. Chester Zoo will stay shut during the heatwave to keep its animals, visitors, staff and plants safe, while pigs are being covered in sun cream as a precaution at the UK's biggest agricultural show in Wales. Steve Bannon, the former top advisor and campaign chief for Donald Trump, has gone on trial for refusing to cooperate with the congressional committee investigating the attack on the U.S. Capitol. On Monday, jury selection began in the 68-year-old's trial at a court in Washington, D.C. The man once billed as the brains behind Mr. Trump's 2016 presidential victory was charged in November with 2 counts of contempt of Congress. He had rebuffed subpoenas requesting his testimony as well as relevant documents about his involvement in efforts to challenge Mr. Trump's 2020 presidential defeat and organize the protests that culminated in the violent attack on the Capitol on 6 January 2021. The committee has been particularly interested in Mr. Bannon's communications with Mr. Trump in the days before the attack, and the war room meetings he held at a hotel near the White House with other key figures as part of the last-ditch attempt to block the certification of Joe Biden's victory. Mr. Bannon, in his popular podcast, warned on 5 January that all hell was going to break loose the following day. The committee first subpoenaed Mr. Bannon in September 2021. The following month, it voted to hold him in contempt of Congress for his refusal to cooperate, charges the full House of Representatives quickly affirmed in a vote. At the time, Mr. Bannon was defiant, saying, "We're taking down the Biden regime." As the trial date approached, he said on his podcast that his legal strategy would involve going medieval on his enemies. But inside the courtroom, Mr. Bannon's bombast has been shelved. The options for his defense have been limited by presiding Judge Carl Nichols, a Donald Trump appointee. Mr. Bannon had sought to claim his contacts with Mr. Trump were covered by executive privilege, a legal principle that holds communications between presidents and their advisors are protected from disclosure in order to allow for candid advice. He also claimed that the congressional committee's subpoenas were invalid because the only Republicans involved were appointed by Democratic Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. Judge Nichols, however, ruled that because Mr. Bannon was a private citizen and not a government employee, he could not make executive privilege claims. He ruled that the committee's subpoenas were valid and also rejected Mr. Bannon's attempts to call Democratic members of Congress to testify. Mr. Bannon's only remaining defense during the trial may be that the final deadline the committee had set for complying with the subpoenas was not clear. What's the point of going to trial if there are no defenses? One of Mr. Bannon's lawyers asked Mr. Nichols after his ruling. Agreed, the judge responded. Last week, Mr. Bannon expressed a willingness to testify to the investigating committee, preferably in an open hearing, after Mr. Trump released a letter waiving any executive privilege issues involved in the case. The committee, and the prosecuting Justice Department lawyers, have questioned the sincerity of the move, however, and said they view the effort as a last-ditch attempt to avoid trial or provide grounds for acquittal. Because of this case's limited scope, Mr. Bannon's trial should conclude in a matter of days. It's about whether he got a subpoena, whether he knew about it, and whether he showed up when he knew he was supposed to be there, prosecuting attorney Amanda Vaughn said last week. If convicted, Mr. Bannon faces a minimum of 30 days and a maximum of 1 year in jail and a fine ranging from $100 to $100,000 for each of the 2 contempt charges. If Mr. Bannon loses his case, he is likely to appeal the judge's prior rulings. Contempt of Congress cases are a rarity in modern U.S. politics, in part because the circumstances are often politically charged. The Obama administration declined to follow up on contempt citations brought against its officials by the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, as did the Republican George W. Bush administration when House Democrats took similar actions. This prosecution has been viewed as a test of the 6th of January committee's power to put teeth behind its investigation, even if a successful conviction will do little to compel the former aide to testify or provide the requested documents. Mr. Bannon is one of 4 former Trump aides to have been cited for contempt by the 6th of January committee. 1. Trade advisor Peter Navarro has been indicted. The Justice Department recently announced that it will not bring charges against the other 2, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and Communications Chief Dan Scavino, who Justice Department officials reportedly viewed as having more plausible executive privilege claims. This is not the first time Mr. Bannon has faced the prospect of a criminal conviction. In August 2020, he was charged with wire fraud and money laundering over his involvement in efforts to fundraise money to build a wall on private property along the U.S.-Mexico border. Mr. Trump pardoned Mr. Bannon for the alleged crimes in one of his final actions as president. A huge fire has broken out in a country park near Birmingham as temperatures across England soar. Firefighters are currently trying to bring the grassland blaze at Lickey Hills Country Park in Rednall under control. Around 4,305 square feet of land near the golf course is understood to be alight. Video of the fire shared on social media shows thick plumes of smoke rising into the air above the tree line. 12 crews are tackling the blaze, with firefighters from Hereford and Worcester have joining forces with others from Kings Norton, Woodgate Valley and Northfield to try and extinguish the flames. The cause of the fire, which was reported at 1:15 p.m., has not been confirmed. While the fire is ongoing, people have been asked to keep their windows and doors closed. Herefordshire and Worcester Fire Control have said, HWFRS and West Midlands Fire and Rescue Service crews are currently fighting a fire in the open in the area of Rose Hill in Rednall in the Lickey hills. People are asked to stay away from the area. Residents are asked to keep their doors and windows closed. Alexei Yukov has lost count of the bodies he's recovered in the Donbass over the past 5 months. He says he thinks it's more than 300, but he can't be sure. Alexei and his men drive a refrigerated white van, marked with a red cross, to carry out their work. They often drive towards danger to collect the bodies and remains of dead Ukrainian and Russian troops and civilians. We work with no days off. Constantly. We drive, we investigate, we transport. We search, all the time, he says. It's grim work too. Digging up the decomposing bodies of Russian soldiers buried in shallow trenches, or gathering their remains from burnt-out armored vehicles. According to the United Nations, more than 5,000 Ukrainian civilians have been killed since Russia invaded in February. There are no official figures for how many Ukrainian troops have died. But one advisor to President Zelensky told the BBC last month that between 100 to 200 Ukrainian soldiers were being killed every day. On average, it's at the lower end of that scale. Alexei says that figure sounds realistic to him. But he believes the Russians are losing 3 times that number. One Ukrainian soldier we spoke to, who had fought in Severodonetsk, described Russian tactics as similar to the First World War, with waves of their infantry running into a hail of bullets. Who does Alexei think is winning the war? It's not about who is winning. He says. It's about who's right. They, Russia, came here and that was unforgivable. Every Ukrainian soldier we spoke to said they still believed they could win. Even in units that had suffered combat casualties of more than half of the troops. But it's taking its toll on the living as well as the dead. Alexei hasn't seen his 1-year-old daughter for months. This war has ruined the life you had and the one you've been building, he says. He adds that at the end of the day it all catches up, that feeling when you are empty inside. The unfillable void. Death comes quickly in the Donbass. Russian shells take mere seconds to land, and they're being used in industrial quantities. On average, Russia is firing 20,000 artillery shells a day. Ukraine is able to respond with just 6,000. There's no respite from the sound of heavy shelling at a military medical station we visit. The chief medical officer, who only wants to be known as Dr. Anatoly for his own safety, describes the situation on the front line as fragile. He shows us photographs of a badly damaged military ambulance, riddled with bullet holes and torn to shreds by shrapnel. Dr. Anatoly says the Red Cross painted on their vehicles mean nothing to Russians. 2 more ambulances are waiting outside the building under camouflage nets, ready to go to pick up the injured. We meet Tina and Polina, 2 frontline medics. Tina used to work at a children's hospital before she volunteered to join the army. She wipes away tears as she talks about the family she's now missing. The pain goes away, because you have a task. To get a person to a hospital alive, she says. I ask if she's scared. Of course it's scary. When a shell lands nearby, everything shrinks inside you. For every soldier killed, many more are injured. Tina says she's not allowed to give numbers but adds, there are casualties almost every day, and not just one. Sometimes many, sometimes a lot. Polina is just 21. The war's already cast a big shadow over her short life. Her father and uncle are now prisoners in Russian-occupied Ukraine. She says she's trying her best not to let it get her down. She exercises and listens to music whenever she can, just to keep some sense of normality. But Polina admits it's hard not to feel gloomy and depressed, apart from the bullets flying over your head. Wounded people, and those wounded are often my friends and buddies. If you're taking it to heart, it's going to be tough. It's the troops she treats who give her hope. The guys who are injured and exhausted don't even want to go to hospital sometimes. They say I'm not going to leave my mates, we're holding the line together. President Volodymyr Zelensky has suspended the head of Ukraine's spy agency, SBU, and the prosecutor general, citing many cases of treason in the two powerful organizations. He said more than 60 former employees were now working against Ukraine in Russian-occupied areas. A total of 651 collaboration and treason cases had been opened against law enforcement officials. He added, the officials, Ivan Bakanov and Irina Venediktova, have not commented. In a video address late on Sunday, Mr. Zelensky said, such an array of crimes against the foundations of the national security of the state pose very serious questions to the relevant heads of the two organizations. Each of these questions will receive a proper answer, the Ukrainian president added. In a later appearance on Ukrainian TV, Andriy Smirnov, one of Mr. Zelensky's top advisors, clarified that the officials have not been fired, as initially suggested, but merely removed pending an investigation. In order to prevent the potential influence of these two officials on criminal proceedings, which are being investigated in relation to SBU employees who are suspected of cooperation with the aggressor country, and the same applies to the prosecutor's office, the president made appropriate decisions, Mr. Smirnov said. The removal of SBU chief Ivan Bakanov, a childhood friend of Mr. Zelensky, follows the high-profile arrest of a former SBU regional head in Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014. Oleg Kulinich is suspected of treason. Everyone who together with him was part of a criminal group that worked in the interests of the Russian Federation will also be held accountable, Mr. Zelensky said. It is about the transfer of secret information to the enemy and other facts of cooperation with the Russian special services. Senior intelligence officials based in Kherson have also been charged, and Mr. Zelensky suggested that further action would be taken against other SBU officers. It has long been assumed Ukraine had a problem with Russian infiltration of its security services, and in his speech Mr. Zelensky sought to lay out the impact of repeated security breaches. It will come as no surprise to many in Ukraine that Moscow tried to infiltrate their security services and prosecutor's office. Russia's FSB has a long history of trying to work from the inside. Indeed, all intelligence agencies do. That is how they work. What may be more shocking is the extent to which they succeeded, seemingly undermining Ukraine's defenses at a crucial moment. The strategically important city of Kherson fell in days, with bridges that should have been blown up apparently left standing. The fear is that the insidious actions of a surprisingly large number of Ukrainian officials and officers helped Russia's offensive and left Ukraine exposed. It is not being suggested that either Ivan Bakanov or Irina Venediktova betrayed their country, but that they ran organizations where others did. For that, they have both been suspended from their offices. It is also worth remembering that the problem of security service infiltration is not unique to Ukraine. Indeed, shortly after the start of the war there was reportedly a purge of FSB officers suspected of working for Ukraine or at least being sympathetic to their cause. There will be no secret service on earth that doesn't have some issues with foreign agents. But the apparent scale of this will be genuinely concerning to Ukrainians. Especially coming at a time when the stakes could not have been higher. There have been reports for several weeks that Mr. Zelensky wanted to replace Mr. Bakanov after coming to blame him for failures in stopping the Russian advance in February. The 47-year-old was picked to head the intelligence agency in 2019 after managing Mr. Zelensky's insurgent campaign for the presidency. Opposition figures criticized the appointment, arguing that the former TV producer was unqualified to lead the SBU. Ms. Venediktova will be succeeded by her deputy, Oleksiy Simonenko, Mr. Zelensky said. She took office in 2020 as Ukraine's first female law enforcement chief after Mr. Zelensky fired her predecessor, accusing him of not producing results. But he warned at the time that someone else would be hired if she could not clamp down on corruption in the country. Earlier this month she told the BBC that her office was investigating some 21,000 war crimes and crimes of aggression allegedly committed by Russia since the start of its invasion. In other developments, Canada flew a repaired turbine for Russia's Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline to Germany, Russia's Kommersant newspaper reports. It is expected to reach Russia within 5 to 7 days. There have been fears that Russia could use annual repairs to the line to shut down gas deliveries to Europe. Police in Moscow detained and released Marina Ovsyannikova, the Russian journalist who interrupted a live TV broadcast with an anti-war message in March. Ukraine says a significant number of Russian warships in the Black Sea were moved from Crimea further east to the port of Novorossiysk. This comes after Kyiv received further deliveries of longer-range missile systems from its Western allies. Dozens of distraught relatives and local residents attended the funeral of 4-year-old Liza, who was one of 24 people killed when Russian missiles hit the central Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia on 14 July. Russia's former president Dmitry Medvedev, now deputy head of the Security Council, warned Ukraine of a «judgment day» if it were to attack Crimea.